So then shifting over into our main actions of this plant. What we see is that as an aromatic bitter, it is having a carminative action in the gut. So those volatile essential oils are going to help to dispel gas, wind, bloating in the GI, bring blood flow to the gut. As a bitter, it's going to increase digestive secretions. So as a bitter tonic, we're stimulating the liver, a little bit of the gallbladder to secrete bile, pancreatic enzymes, stomach acid, all the secretions that enhance and optimize digestion will be stimulated with hyssop as a bitter tonic. But then we see it is a choice expectorant, and that's really how I've used it the most is as an expectorant. Now we see some interesting properties here with hyssop as an expectorant because on the one hand, it is a warming, aromatic, stimulant expectorant herb, right? So it's helping to stimulate the lungs, the cough reflex, to remove stagnant mucus. And one of the specific ways that it's been used for that is when there's a lot of heat in the tissue and it's baked down that mucus in the lungs. So it's really indicated for stuck phlegm, like phlegm that's it has adhered to the respiratory tissues and therefore is very difficult to expectorate. And it's twofold. On the one hand, the volatile oils are going to help to penetrate into that stuck stagnant mucus, disperse it and kind of break it up so that it's easier to expectorate. But then as a bitters increase secretions, and we tend to think of bitters increasing secretions like in the digestive system, but as I've mentioned in a lot of other videos, that bitter receptors are scattered all throughout the body. And so, they're affecting the vasculature, they're affecting the heart, they're affecting certainly liver, gallbladder, digestion. Bitter receptors bitter plants are doing a lot more than just stimulating digestion. And some bitter herbs will actually have an influence on the lungs. And that's what I believe is going on here with hyssop is, we tend to think of herbs that moisten the lungs as really being demulcents, right? Licorice, marshmallow, slippery elm, plantain, these are kind of our good demulcent expectorants that really moisten the lungs. But hyssop is actually traditionally used for very dry lung conditions. It's very specific for dry coughs. And at first that's kind of surprising, if you're looking at the properties and the energetics of this herb, which we'll talk about in a minute. You would kind of assume this would be used for a wet cough, right? Because it's so pungent and warming and dispersive and stimulant expectorant. Typically, we think of stimulant expectorants for really wet coughs. But in this case, hyssop is actually really good for a dry cough. And when I think about that, kind of the physiological process of when you want to use it. So say there's a respiratory tract infection of some sort. Your mucosal membranes are secreting mucus to try to, clear and cleanse the respiratory tissues. But because there's infection, there's heat, there's a lot of immunological activity. And so what happens is that heat cooks down that mucus. And as it cooks it down, those fluids are evaporating off, and that mucus becomes thick and hardened, and it kind of gets sticky and it adheres to the respiratory tissue, and then you get this cough it's dry. And it's not that the mucosal membrane is dry and cracked like a clay desert. It's more that it's like if you think of a pond that's the water's evaporating down, and then you get that kind of slimy, sludgy layer on top, but there's not enough fluid there for it to be liquidy. It's like there's a dryness there. So that's really when hyssop is very excellent to be used for a cough. So that's kind of zooming in a little bit on the stimulant expectorant property here of hyssop. But it's unique in that it is actually very good for a dry cough. Hoarse voice, dry, sore throat, really, really good remedy here. And I think, so to second that, so the volatile oils dispersing, breaking up that stagnant mucus, but then the bitters are gonna kind of get those mucosal membranes secreting again. And this is really important for respiratory health because when your mucosal membranes in the lungs start secreting more, they're bringing fresh antibodies, fresh immunological factors to the local area, which ultimately helps fight the infection. One of the other main ways that this herb has been used traditionally is as a diaphoretic. So this is a classic fever remedy that, of course, being coupled with its property as an expectorant makes it really, really great for, you know, your coughs, colds, flus. It's funny, we always lump those things together. A cold and a flu are actually really different. You know, colds are typically more sinus congestion, maybe a little cough, but you don't have fever. Influenza is typically always accompanied by fever. So this is, I guess it's more of a flu remedy, but it'll work for a cold as well. So really great for stimulating diaphoresis, making the body sweat, driving heat from the core out to the periphery. It was classically used for a lot of febrile conditions, scarlet fever, measles, typhoid fever, things like that. Those aren't exactly common conditions that we treat today, but that's how it was classically used, and we can kind of take, you know, that type of sickness and think of what is happening in our modern world and apply it in that way too. Hint, hint. So it could be very applicable potentially for treating COVID, especially as that later stage of COVID ends up with a very dry cough typically. Well, the new variants are a little bit different, but kind of the original variants, as the disease progressed, you would end up with this very dry cough, and I think this remedy would be really remedial for it. I haven't actually used it too much for COVID clients of mine, but I haven't really had a whole lot of it around, and after kind of digging into this remedy in a little more detail, it's like, oh, that would make a really good COVID remedy. So that's something to consider in the combination of expectorant, diaphoretic. Great remedy there. So yes, and as a bitter tonic, I mentioned it having an influence on the liver. It does have some diuretic properties, so it can be used to help flush the kidneys a little bit. And really kind of a systemic remedy, right? I mean, it does have this nice specificity for the lungs and the febrile system, but really I think of this as kind of a systemic, almost protective kind of plant in the way that it's influencing so many organ systems in the body. Okay, and then the final action that I wanted to mention is that this is actually a really great antiseptic plant too. So the volatile oils, the bitter principles have antiseptic properties. Matthew Wood actually notes that the leaves of this plant can grow I believe it's a yeast or a fungus on it that actually contains penicillin. So that's pretty interesting. And so it is, again, a great remedy for treating infection here because it does have antiseptic properties. And that coupled with the way it's supporting fever and supporting cough, really choice plant here.